Hi, my name is Dylan, this is PlyCreations, and a very warm welcome to my workshop. Often I need to find the middle of a piece of lumber, especially when I'm processing raw lumber to prepare for making a project. I've settled on two simple methods for finding the middle of any lumber that I work on. Both of them are really simple, and only on one do you need a little bit of maths, but for the second one, no maths required at all. So I'd like to show you both of those methods today. I'll shortly be showing you a close-up from my other camera, and I'll go through the process of how I find the middle of the boards that I work on. To start off with, I'll need my eyes, and then I'll move you over to the other camera. At the workbench and on the other camera, you'll see that I have a section of lumber here. This is red oak, and I have a rule, I've got my pencil, and you may need to have a marking gauge as well. So I'm quickly going to show you the first method that I use, and this is the one that you might need some maths and at least need to be able to divide a number by 2. Now, one of the first methods, or one way you can go about it, is to measure across the width of your workpiece, divide that by 2, and of course then you'll have the middle. In this case it is 173.5 millimeters, not something I'd like to divide in 2, and it's not going to give me a decent even number that I'll be able to easily use to mark the middle. So how do you do that, and how do you find middle easily? As you place the rule with the corner for 0 on one edge of the board, and you swing the rule around until a number that is easily divisible by 2 lines up with the other edge. And there we have 18. Divide that by 2 is 9. Now, if you'd like to carry that measurement down on the board, as you can continue, and every so often you do the same. 18 again, 19 is there. Just to check how accurate we are, if we measure from this edge, we are at roughly 86 mils. If we come this side, that is roughly 86.5. So for raw work or for rough work, that is good enough and relatively accurate. Of course, any number that you can divide by 2 will work. So line up the 0, and we line up with 20 on this side. Of course, half of 20 is 10, and you may notice that it lines up, the mark originally lines up quite nicely with the 10, which is 20 divided by 2. Very easy to do. Now, usually you would like to mark the full length of the board, and you can connect these marks and use a rule and mark them. However, what I do prefer is to use my marking gauge, and I'll set the marking gauge on the mark that I made. Just check it and make sure, tighten up the fence, and then quite simply registering with a fence against one of the edges. Of course, it doesn't really matter which edge you've lined up, because effectively you're marking the middle of the board. Just to make that visible, you can mark it with a pencil, and that marks the middle of the board for you. Very little math required, really easy to do, and if you have a rule, there's no reason why you can't use this one quite easily to find the middle of the board. So I'll go over to the next method, bring you back to the camera, onto the second method, which is frankly my favorite. No maths required whatsoever. It's a really easy way to go about finding the middle of any workpiece you may be busy with. For that, you'll need a traditional marking gauge with a pin, and of course our handy pencil. I do prefer to use it with the marking gauge with a pin. You could be using a marking gauge, a cutting gauge, but not the ideal solution if you are marking rough lumber. I do find that the cut isn't deep enough for me to clearly see where I've made the mark on my raw lumber. So I do prefer a traditional marking gauge with a pin. Do make sure the pin is sharp. Sharper the pin is, the neater and the clearer your mark will be. So we're using the fence of the marking gauge against one of the edges, and we need to find the middle of the board using the pin. So we loosen the fence and we really just eyeball what we think the middle of the board may be. Now, sometimes it's quicker than other times and it may take a few tries. I am holding the fence in place and then tighten the fence down. Make a mark, bring it over to the other fence and bring the gauge to the fence, or sorry, the fence to the edge, and you'll notice that that is our mark and this is where we are now, or would be making the mark. So we're quite a way off. We need to extend the gauge somewhat, make another mark, and you'll see here that we're about 3 or 4 millimeters off. This is the previous mark, this is the new mark, but our fence is not extended as much as we'd like, but very little needed at this point. So try it again. And there we practically line up between the marks from either edge of the workpiece. Make sure you tighten the fence down, and what we do then is we proceed to mark the workpiece as best we can, remembering to register the fence of your marking gauge on either side of the board. I'm right-handed, so I prefer to do this. Notice that I may not necessarily hold the fence itself. What I am doing is I'm holding the bar and pulling the fence into the workpiece and making the mark. And there you have it. We've marked the middle of our board. It's relatively rough work, but you can do the same methods or use the same methods on lumber that has been processed and that needs to be cut to their final dimensions. I often use it when I process raw lumber, as I mentioned earlier. Makes it really easy for me, and I simply take this section of lumber then over to the bandsaw and I cut along the middle line and I'm roughly where I need it to be. Really handy. So those are the two methods that I use. Try them and see how you like them. Of course, the final one that I showed is my favorite. And that's it. Brings us to a short edition of PlyCreations. Thank you for joining me. I'll leave the link of my website down at the bottom of the page, as I usually do. I'll leave the link to 2 articles on my website in the description. One is the process that I follow to process raw lumber to get down to dimension before I start building my projects. And the second article I wrote on how I go about to mark out my lumber, to be able to keep track of what I do or what I need to do on each piece and where they go in the project. So do have a look at those links and have a look at the website. But as always, it was great to have you join me. Thank you for being with me, and I hope to see you again around here soon. Hope you have a good one. Cheers. And that is going to be too much. Much too much.